Hello, today's video is going to take an exam style question on Inspector Calls and it's going to show you how to plan and execute an eye-wateringly good essay in response. And as is my way, I'm not just going to roll out the good stuff and say, here's the gold standard paragraphs folks, have a nice life. No, I'm going to explain why they're good. We're going to look at what's in this thing in terms of the content and the style of those paragraphs that's getting the examiner salivating with delight. Now, if you're with the Edexcel exam board, you probably know the ropes by now. You know, this is not an exam where you need to be looking at the effects of language and structure. Although, geez, I'd love to get my hands on the world-class Wally who thought that was a good idea. You know, words being the building blocks of every text ever written. But do you know what? That's the way it is. That's show business. We've got to roll with it. So what we do need to do is look at incidents in the play, look at dialogue and stage direction in the play that link to the key theme mentioned in the question, and then think, what is the meaning of this dialogue or action? What is its symbolism? What is its significance? That's how you interpret it, as it were. A brief aside about this critical style that the examiner referred to in the previous slide. What's he talking about when he says he wants us to be writing in the appropriate critical style? Well, I think the best explanation comes from a poet called Alexander Pope, who talks about what often was thought but never so well expressed. In other words, framing your ideas in clear but articulate sentences. So, for example, rather than saying, this play says people should be nicer to one another, you'd jazz it up a bit. You'd say something like, the play asserts a socialist message, promoting the idea of community over capitalist self-interest. You can see then, it's about polishing your prose, your writing. And like anything really, playing football, the violin, the little goofy coin trick I'm learning to dazzle my daughter, this stuff gets better with practice. Gets better with practice. Lastly, of course, the examiner wants you to link the text, the play, with contextual factors, relevant details about Priestley's life, or the era when the play was set, the Edwardian era, or when it was written, you know, at the fag end of World War II, 1945. Now, I've no wish to carpet bomb you with a big hairy list of don'ts for this exam, but I have noticed two big traps that students can fall into when writing these Edexcel exam responses. And the first trap is that students can just get bogged down in retelling the story, you know, summarising bits of the plot as opposed to analysing and interpreting things. Far better to just lock in on one event or bit of dialogue or a stage direction and then interpret the significance or the meaning of that. That's the way you want to do it. The other mistake that students can make is tossing in little Billy Bolt on random bits of historical detail at the bottom of their paragraphs. What have I had in the past? I've had students tell me about when Priestley's birthday was, when he died. A couple of years back, some genius even told me what star sign he was. No. It needs to be relevant detail. I'm being a bit of a sad though. I've looked at the examiner's report and he says that the analysis you do of the text, you know, looking at the significance, the importance of that dialogue or that action or that stage direction, that needs to be, as it were, the springboard for the contextual detail. You know, there needs to be a link between what you've done in that textual analysis and that contextual detail that you're laying on. And here's the question that we're going to go toe to toe with today. Now, I've saved a bit of time and I've whizzed about my highlighter to identify key words so we've got a clear idea of what the examiner expects from us. Let's read the question. Explore how relationships change in the play. You must refer to the context of the play in your answer. And this exam board gives you 50 minutes, that's 40 marks, and 8 for spelling, punctuation and grammar. I suspect then that this question is going to require us to do a bit of before and after, you know, look at Act 1 and jump to Act 3 so we can appreciate the changes in various relationships between characters in this play. So brace yourself for a bit of bouncing around between acts. Right, the first relationship we're going to look at in terms of changes is that between Sheila and her parents. In Act 1, Sheila's dialogue reveals a lot about that relationship. When Mr. Birling is honking on with himself, as per, she apologises for interrupting him. She says, "Sorry, Daddy." and we can interpret the significance or the meaning of this line of dialogue, because what it suggests is she's got a very respectful or deferential attitude towards her parents. We can even drill a bit deeper and look at that word daddy as opposed to dad or father. It's a little bit infantile, a little bit childish, and perhaps just emphasises that she's dependent still on her parents, not financially dependent on mummy and daddy to keep her in a lifestyle to which she's become accustomed. By Act 3 though, there's been some changes, hasn't there? There's a little bit of fire in Sheila's belly at last. I mean, obviously, as my goofy picture suggests, she doesn't actually hit them, but she really is a lot more assertive, combative, aggressive in her interactions with them. She stands up to them. And when Birling appears to be relieved because Gould is not a real policeman, Sheila has a pop at him and says, well, he inspected us. And let's analyse how the relationship has changed then. Well, because of Sheila's political awakening, Gould has shocked her into rejecting capitalist self-interest and to, give a little bit more care and attention to the suffering of the poor. Because of that, she's no longer happy to just breeze through life leeching off the profits of capitalist exploitation. It literally is blood money, isn't it? People have died so she can sit port in daddy's plush pad. She's not prepared to do that anymore. The relationship has changed, there's more friction. Let's go on to forge now a relevant contextual link, because we talked about Sheila making that transition from capitalism to socialism. Well, Sheila's change would mirror social changes that were taking place in 1940s Britain. You'd have had the birth of the welfare state at the tail end of the 1940s. Jump back to the Edwardian era, the early 1900s, there was no dole, no healthcare. No fair really, was it? It was a poverty trap. People were trapped in poverty, not because they're lazy, just because they were doomed to low wages and a miserable life if they weren't born to wealth. Poverty was a life sentence. And a pretty short life it'd be at that. Sheila switched to socialism then, echoing or capturing a real striving in British society for a fairer deal for everyone. Before we start to turn those ideas we just looked at into model paragraphs, let's briefly recap the question. We're looking at how relationships change in the play, and we have to link to context. Next step, applying a critical style, a little bit of literary polish to our ideas so they please the examiner's ear and eye. I think it's 3 paragraphs that have cranked out on the back end of that talk on Sheila and her relationship with the parents. There's one on the situation in Act 1, one on the situation in Act 3, and a relevant contextual paragraph 2. Let's have a look. In Act 1, Sheila's dialogue reveals her initial relationship with her parents. Apologising for interrupting Birling, she says, "Sorry, Daddy." This powerfully highlights to the reader that Sheila is very deferential, very respectful towards her parents. Moreover, Daddy suggests a childlike dependency on her parents, perhaps a reflection of her financial dependency on them. We'll cane through that paragraph very quickly using the highlighter here to identify best practice. So the first line, I've talked about dialogue. This is something of Sheila's, either a dialogue or an action or a stage direction that is revealing something. And in this case, it's revealing her relationship with her parents. Initial relationship, because of course the question is asking us to focus on changing relationships. My quotation is not massive, isn't it? I couldn't remember the ins and outs of it. I just remember Birling's honking on with himself and she says, "Sorry, Daddy." So it's 2 words really, though. We don't have to go into whacking great tracks of evidence here. Powerfully is an evaluative adverb. For some reason, the examiner loves that. Ditto the term reader. You've always got to say what the effect is on the reader. It's just a itch of the examiners that you've got to scratch. There's my explanation. It just shows that she's very respectful towards them. Then I've gone deeper, haven't I? Moreover, that's just my signpost that I'm going deeper into my analysis. I've just suggested that that word daddy refers to a childlike dependency on her parents. This paragraph, of course, marks the change in the relationship. Let's have a read. However, by Act 3, the relationship has changed and Sheila is more antagonistic towards her parents. When Birling shows relief because Gould was not a real inspector, Sheila asserts, "Well, he inspected us." This successfully suggests to the reader Sheila's transition from capitalist to socialist values. Gould's visit has shocked her into perceiving the flaws in the self-interested attitude of her parents. And again, we'll do a quick billy whiz through this paragraph so we can see why it works. I've talked about the relationship has changed. clearly there and responding to the questions set about changing relationships. Just said that Sheila's a bit more argumentative, a bit more combative, antagonistic towards her parents. There's my evidence, and then I've interpreted that evidence. I've said what it suggests. It suggests that because she's changed from capitalist to socialist values, she's now able to see the flaws in her parents' attitudes. And finally, the contextual paragraph. Let's have a read, see how it works. Sheila's change mirrors the social change taking place in 1940s Britain. With the birth of the welfare state shortly after World War II, the country was clearly rejecting the laissez-faire style of government that characterised the Edwardian era and embracing a more socialist ethos. Notice that this paragraph positively drips with that critical style. I've really applied a nice little glossy polish with the phrasing that I've employed. We've got Edwardian era for 1900s, socialist ethos for an attitude of equality or a sense that needs to be more fairness in society. When the government didn't do anything for the people, didn't give any dole or free healthcare, I've referred to that as a laissez-faire style of government. That's definitely the kind of phrasing that's going to get the examiner hot under the collar. And of course it's relevant as well. Sheila's change mirroring social change. I'm going to go on now and work up some ideas about the changing relationship between Mr. and Mrs. Birling. However, you'll be relieved to hear when I do lay on the model paragraphs at the end, I'm not going to deconstruct them in eye-watering detail. I'll just lay on a bit of highlighter. You can join the dots and think about why the paragraphs are so effective. But let's begin at the beginning. Let's start with the plan. So Mrs. Birling's dialogue in Act 1 reveals a lot about the relationship they have initially. Again, I can't remember the quotation, but it's a closed book exam, so I'm not losing too much sleep about that. She does say that men with important work to do must prioritise business over time with their family. Let's interpret that evidence. What we're seeing here very clearly is the respect, the deference that she has for Mr. Birling, and by extension, the gender hierarchy. And unfortunately, of course, this is a hierarchy that subjugates or demeans women. Big changes by Act 3 though, aren't there? Under that pressure from Gould's interrogation, Mrs. Birling cracks, she lashes out, whips round and blames her husband for starting the rot, for firing Eva, which she says caused her death in the first place. Let's interpret that bit of evidence. That's showing that under Gould's unstinting pressure, these family relationships are imploding, they're fragmenting, as the Birlings are forced to confront the horrific consequences of their selfish, sinful behaviour. And by horrific consequences, of course, I'm referring to the agonising death of Eva Smith, that grisly suicide by sucking down the bottle of bleach. And presto changeo, we've parlayed our ideas about the changing relationship of the Birlings into 3 stonking good paragraphs. One focuses on Act 1, one links to context, and the third links to the change in the relationship, how it's different in Act 3. Have a read, and again, as I've suggested, look at the stuff that's highlighted. Why is it highlighted? What bits of best practice am I directing your attention to? I'm going to tonk in my relevant contextual link here to the Act 1 stuff. It seems more pertinent. Again, have a read. The highlighted stuff is just emphasising what I'm doing right and what you'd do well to ape in the exam. And as promised, that final paragraph looking at the change in the relationships. Notice words like relationship and change to highlight, because of course these are key words, emphasising to the examiner we are linking to the question he set us. We're going to kick up the bum off done now, folks. We're just going to have a quick gander at the change in relationship between Sheila and Gerald. In Act 1, they seem a very well suited couple. Sheila's materialistic values, which are telegraphed on the back of that line of dialogue, now I really feel engaged, when she's checking out the bling on her finger. This kind of links with Gerald's support of capitalism. I think he says here, when Birling's honking on about, working for higher costs and lower prices. It's all changed by Act 3 though. As we suggested, Sheila's converted to socialism, and Gerald, as his line of dialogue there, everything's all right now, Sheila suggests. Gerald, well, he's zipping up his boots and going back to his roots, isn't he? He is reaffirming his loyalty to capitalist values, the idea of focusing on self-interest at the expense of others. Everything's all right now, Sheila, basically translates to I'm joyfully going to go back to grinding the nose of the poor in the dirt to accrue fat wads of profit. Plus there's a wee contextual detail at the bottom just about how Priestley's having a pop here at the shallow values of the Edwardian middle class. If you were so inclined, you could work these 3 starting sentences up into the 3 paragraphs that you'd use to engage before, after and relative context for Sheila and Gerald's change relationship. But that's pretty much end of line, as they say in sci-fi classic Tron. It only remains for me to say to you, toodaloo.